Hi, today we'll look at the work of research ethics committees, at least from the perspective of guidelines and regulations. So, what is the mandate of ethics committees? An ethics committee is meant to safeguard the dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of all actual or potential research participants. So, the term used actual, these research participants that are obviously um, a part of a study from which data are being gathered, but also we have the term potential research participants. Right? Potential research participants referring to this could be, for example, unintended research participants. So if you are doing a social experiment, and gathering, for example, video of passers-by in a specific area or specific street, right? Your intention might be to only gather, for example, uh, data of specific individuals, but by default, you already also start gathering data um, from other individuals anyway, right? Or if you do a study on, say, if you do a study that includes some kind of genetic testing, you might be getting also information beyond that of that specific individual, which extends to this individual's family, so on and so forth. Okay, and a cardinal principle of research involving human participants is respect for the dignity of persons. Right, so take note, an ethics committee is there to safeguard dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of research participants, right? It doesn't just say safety of research participants, dignity, rights, safety, and well-being, and that's quite a tall order. So, uh, and this is because no matter how lofty the goal of research is, the goals of research should never and can never be permitted to override the health, well-being, care, dignity, rights, safety, and well-being of research participants. Um, by the way, this is I'm most of the text that you will see here comes from the WHO operational guidelines for ethics committees that review biomedical research. So we'll go through what this guideline says in terms of what ethics committees should review. So first, an ethics committee should review the scientific design and conduct of the study, which includes looking into the study design, statistical methodology, number of and the number of research participants in relation to the study design and statistical methodology. So if you can do with, for example, 100 participants, there's no need and there's no use for getting 200 research participants. Justification of predictable risks and inconveniences weighed against anticipated benefits of the research participants in the concerned community. So this is the balancing of the risks and the benefits, meaning that research ethics committees must be clear on what the basket of risks contain versus what the basket of benefits contain. Yeah, so meaning that there's a need to specify in the protocol that research ethics committees receive, what are the direct and indirect risks as opposed to direct and indirect benefits. Um, uh, the justification for the use of control arms, how many arms are there? Is this a superiority, inferiority? Sorry, is this a superiority or a non-inferiority study? What are the criteria for premature withdrawing of research participants? Criteria for suspending or terminating the research. What are the provisions for monitoring, auditing? Is there a need for a data safety monitoring board? And if there's a need for a data and safety monitoring board, is there actually one? Um, adequacy of the site, including the staff, facilities, emergency procedures, for example, number of beds in a hospital made available for the study, as opposed to the number of research participants. And not only the availability of supporting staff, the credibility of the staff. Do they have the appropriate credibility to be part of the research staff, right? So the manner in which the results of the research will be reported and published. And then when it comes to recruitment of research participants, the following are the tasks of research ethics committees. Looking into the characteristics of the population. For example, ethics committee members should look into the gender, age, literacy, culture, economic status, and ethnicity. Why should you do that? Because then, depending on these factors, then there might be a need for further safeguarding, of the rights, welfare, security and safety of, shall we say, vulnerable people, right? There might be so looking into the characteristics of the population will affect, for example, how the ethics committee evaluates the informed consent procedure. Right? The means by which initial contact and recruitment is to be conducted. How is this initial contact? If the intended research population comes from a specific community, is this initial contact and recruitment even appropriate? Right. The means by which full information is to be conveyed to potential research participants. No, so this refers to the informed consent procedure. So what is the manner in which information is to be conveyed to potential research participants or their representatives in case that the participants are considered incapable of consent? What would be the inclusion and exclusion criteria for the research participants? Now, when it comes to care and protection of research participants, as you would see, this is like somehow an extension of what we just discussed now. Research ethics committees must also look into the suitability of the investigator's qualifications and experience for the proposed study, because the investigator is in fact in charge of partially or fully of the study. Right, so the qualifications of the investigators really matter. Right, you want to make sure that the person made responsible not only knows what he or she is doing, but is also appropriately trained to do that, has the relevant experience, so on and so forth. Any plans to withdraw or withhold standard therapies for the purpose of the research. And the justifications for such action. Will this, if there are plans to withdraw or withhold standard therapies, what would be the effects of that, and are these effects acceptable? Will these be short-term, long-term effects? How grave will these effects be? There has to be, again, there has to be some kind of a balancing, which leads to the decision on whether the withdrawal or the withholding of therapies is justified. The medical care that we provided to research participants during and after the course of the research. So during the research, in the different arms, what will be the indications provided? Will there be placebo? After the research, is there a need for continuous intervention, and if so, will this be made available in what form? The adequacy of medical supervision and psychosocial support for the research participants. So, of course, medical supervision is absolutely necessary to ensure that adverse effects and severe adverse effects are monitored. And at the same time, ensuring that psychosocial support are available if relevant. Right. So these are all parts of risk minimization measures, right? Steps to be taken if research participants voluntarily withdraw during the course of the research. And this is not only to ensure that the study goes on, but also to ensure the safety of the withdrawing participant, right? The criteria for extended access to the emergency use of or compassionate use of study products, right? So post-trial access is is as a requirement, right, in many ethics guidelines. What that means will vary, right? So some trials will be able to provide only access to knowledge because it was exploratory and there was no product yet. But then depending on the stage of the trial, there might be also the responsibility to provide access to a therapeutic product once it's proven safe and effective. Or there might be a responsibility to provide continuous access to the study drug, even before any kind of marketing authorization, because for specific patients, then results show efficacy and safety, while at the same time no standard drug exists. There can be situations when yeah, post-trial access is an ethical responsibility according to guidelines, but how it is facilitated would of course depend on the situation of the study, and this is something that ethics committees must also look into. Arrangements for informing the research participants, general practitioner, the GP, and procedures for seeking the participants' consent. So if necessary, the GP must be informed of the participation of this particular person. At the same time, there must, before anything happens, before any kind of informed GP happens, there must be consent for the participants, for his or her GP to be informed. Description of any plans to make the study product available to the research participants following the research. This was somehow related to what we've said a while ago. Description of financial costs to research participants, if any. Of course, ideally, there should not be financial costs to research participants. This must be shouldered by the sponsor, the principal investigator. The awards and compensations for research participants, for example, will the research participants' transportation costs be shouldered? Will they be paid a specific amount for joining a trial? Will they be provided food, gifts? Typical example of gifts would be gift cards, for example. The provisions for compensation treatment in the case of injury, disability, or death of research participant attributable to participation in the research. Will there be insurance involved? Insurance and indemnity arrangements. Okay, and then research ethics committees must also look into protection of research participants' confidentiality, a description of the persons who will have access to personal data of the research participants. So will everyone in the research team have access, or only specific individuals? And how will they have access? Will they have will they have access to all the data, or only specific data? How long will the data be kept? So this refers to the second measures taken to ensure the confidentiality and security of personal information concerning research participants. How will the data be kept? Where will it be stored? For how long will it be stored? So on and so forth. Informed consent process, we've mentioned this a while ago. Description of the process for obtaining informed consent. So remember, it says process for obtaining informed consent. It's not just looking into the informed consent sheet, but how will informed consent be secured? Who will secure it? does this person have experience? Will there be different people gathering informed consent? For example, will there be uh, uh, is there a need for female researchers to gather the informed consent of female research participants, and male researchers to gather informed consent of male participants, so on and so forth, because in some instances that might be required. Adequacy, completeness, and understandability of written oral information. Um, again, an informed consent form and the patient information sheet must be, of course, not only adequate or complete, but it must most definitely be understandable, right? It's not primarily a legal document, though it also is one, right? But it is primarily there for research participants to to read, to understand, and to go back to in case they have questions, right? Clear justification for the intention to include in the research individuals who cannot consent, and a full account of the arrangements for obtaining consent or authorization. So if research participants are those who are unable to consent, there must be a justification for that because these individuals are considered vulnerable, right? Why is there a need to include individuals who are incapable of gaining consent? Can the information or can the data or can the knowledge not be obtained from individuals who are capable of gaining consent? And if it's truly justified that individuals who are incapable of consent are included in a study, what are the arrangements for obtaining their consent or authorization? Um, uh, there would probably be the need, for example, for a legally acceptable representative, right? So there must be arrangements for not only consent but also assent. Assurances that research participants will receive information that becomes available during the course of the research relevant to their participation, especially information relating to rights, safety, and well-being to research participants. And this usually comes in the form of continuous reporting. Provisions made for receiving and responding to queries and complaints from research participants. So is this something clearly stated in the informed consent process? Community considerations. So what are the considerations in terms of involving the community where the research participants are coming from? Community considerations. So research ethics committees must also look at uh, uh, well, the involvement of the community in the research, right? So first would be looking into the impact and relevance of the research in the local community. Remember that a research must be responsive to the needs of a population, right? So then there's a need to look into the relevance of the research in the local community, but also the impact of it, whether positive or negative. And if it's positive, then that's good. But if there are negative impacts, then what are the means or measures to ensure that the risks are minimized? Steps taken to consult with the concerned communities. So was there effort to ensure that that the communities were heard, that their views were heard, um, and of course this can take in many forms, whether in the form of community consultation, um, speaking with the chieftain, so on and so forth. Influence of the community on the consent of individuals. Is there a need, for example, to secure the consent or the agreement of the local chieftain first before before individual consent is made possible, or do individuals would individuals already say yes if their chieftain already said yes? I mean, these are things that need to be need to be considered by research ethics committees. Proposed community consultation during the course of the research, if there's any, and if there's none, then maybe the question why none. Extent to which the research contributes to capacity building, such as enhancement of local healthcare research and the ability to respond to public health needs. Description of the availability and affordability of any successful study product to the concerned community. So that means, will the product be coming back to the community, and if it does, will it be in a manner that is accessible to the community? Manner in which the results of the research will be made available to the research participants. So maybe it's not sufficient to only publish the results in a scientific journal. There might be other means and measures to ensure that that the results come back to them in a manner that that is exploitable by the community. And then now these are we have just looked at what are the things that an ethics committee must look at, right? Must review in the process of an ethics review. But of course, the big task of an ethics committee is not only looking at these and making suggestions, it is also making a decision. Now, in the process of decision making, there are certain things that must be remembered. First is a member should withdraw from the meeting for the decision procedure concerning an application where there arises a conflict of interest. Right. So at the point of decision making, if a member has if a conflict of interest has been identified in relation to one of the members of the ethics committee, then this ethics committee member must withdraw from that meeting. A decision may only be taken when sufficient time has been allowed for review and discussion of an application in the absence of non-members from the meeting, with exception of ethics committee staff. So ethics committees must be given enough time to read through the protocols, to deliberate on them, to ask questions and have these questions answered, right? A decision should only be made at meetings where a quorum is present, and the quorum is stipulated in the operating procedures of the Research Ethics Committee. Though of course we will see this later on. There can be ethics committee review exemptions or also fast track processes, right? The documents required for a full review of the application should be complete, and the relevant elements mentioned above should be considered before a decision is made. So meaning an ethics committee should not make its decision in case the applicant has failed to submit a required document. Right? Only members who participate in the review should participate in the decision. Though this is obvious, we know of situations when those who weren't supposed to be there because of their involvement in the study were there in ethics committee decision making. Yeah, of course, these are all this shouldn't happen, but there were cases of that sort that were discovered, right? There should be a predefined method for arriving at the decision, whether it's by consensus or by voting. Of course, ideally, the consensus is reached after a discussion, but there might be really rare, difficult instances when a voting is necessary because a consensus cannot be reached. In all instances, there must be first a discussion before decision making. Advice that is non-binding may be appended to the decision, because decision making is not just about saying that whether this is accepted or not accepted. Ethics committees can also come ethics committee decisions can also come in with non-binding advice, and this can easily be attached to the decision. In cases of conditional decisions, clear suggestions for revision and procedure for having the application re-reviewed should be specified. So it's possible that the decision is approved as conditional approval, right? Conditional to making a revision of certain sections or a methodology, or well, whatever, right? But what the suggestions or requirements are for this conditional approval must be clearly stated, right? So that um, uh, so that the revised application can be done can be done sufficiently. A negative decision on the application should be supported by clearly stated reasons, right? So it's not, an ethics committee should not reject an application without a clear reason why. So after this, the whole process of discussion and trying to come, well, as mentioned a while ago, decision making can come in as follows: approved, minor modification, major modifications, request for more information, so no decision at all, because information is, well, the ethics committee needs more information to make decision, or disapproved, and of course reasons must be stated. Now, post approval, that is, once an ethics committee gives its thumbs up to an application, there would still be continuing review and post approval responsibilities. Now, what these are is not very clear, right? But one perfunctory manner, or one perfunctory responsibility, is the responsibility to receive periodic reports, right? And this could be reports on protocol amendments that affect the right, safety, or well-being of the research participants, or serious and unexpected adverse events, which may or may not come with, or well, usually it should come with protocols on what should happen next, right? And any event or any new information that may affect the benefit-risk ratio of the study. Now, whether research ethics committees also have the responsibility not only to receive these reports and probably to act on them, but also to actively monitor research, is up for discussion. Now, when it comes to records, of course, an ethics committee must maintain all relevant records. 3 years seems to be standard for some 5 years, or some maybe even longer. And usually records should be related to research ethics committee operations, like its SOPs, membership files, submitted documents, protocol related files, dossiers, minutes of the meetings, minutes of the decisions of ethics committees included, and other correspondences. Now, if we look into ICH GCP, the protocol that's submitted in ethics committee would contain many things, such as what you see in front of you, but also including a section about ethics, the description of ethical considerations in relation to the trial. And of course, it'll be ideal if the ethics committee's form or application form would require more information into this description of ethical considerations, right? The ethics committee would want information related to what we have seen a while ago. Areas that research ethics committees would have to look into. And other documents might be CV of the PI, investigator's brochure, UDRAS CT form, questionnaire, interview guide, age-appropriate info sheets for children, consent form for parents, consent form for persons able to consent, etc., and other things. Now, I've mentioned a while ago that there can be that though most of what we've been saying apply to full board review, and this applies to studies with more than minimal risk. There can be exemption. You know, an exemption will be, for example, when um, uh, yeah, no research participants are involved. Yeah, or or the risks are so low. For example, if the only procedure involved would be interviews or focus group discussions. In some countries, these are exempted from ethics committee review, right? While there's also a middle ground, it's called the expedited review when risks are minimal. So there are different definitions of minimal risk, right? And daily life standard is probably the most famous gauge of what minimal risk is. Right now, in all cases, of course, the ethics committee must be clear on what it means by minimal risk. Now, it's possible that some ethics committees will have an expedited process where only one or two reviewers will be involved in reviewing the protocol or the dossier, and not the full board. Now, in expedited review, yeah, so these are examples of cases where expedited review may be applicable to, like in cases where, as we've said, risk is minimal, protocols that are not confidential, in routine procedures are non-invasive or routine, protocols that use previously collected data, minor revision of previously approved protocol, or procedural items such as just like gathering of names of personnel, etc., etc. Um, all right. Now there are several challenges to Rex, um, and this would be important topics for for discussion, right? Like the need to address the growing public mistrust of research, and somehow of research ethics committees need to develop capacity for quality review, balancing between time and thorough review. Between expedited review and full board. Um, Need to harmonize requirements in different parts of the world, not only between low and middle income countries and high income countries, but also sometimes between recs within the same country or continent. Need to develop ethical review systems that involve research stakeholders, such as regulatory authorities, industry, academe, patient groups, and if to involve them, how. Provide a system on how to do risk benefit assessment, because now it seems that risk benefit assessment is done individually, by individual members, or it's very procedural but not really a weighing of the risks and the benefits, and the provision of an environment where the voice of the patients is central and essential. So it's not sufficient to just say that the researchers have consulted the community and that's fine. There must be, well, um, there must be a representative who's able to voice out the view of the patients. Now, how that is done, and whether how it's currently done is actually the best way to do it is up for discussion. Okay, thank you, and I hope that this has provided well, more food for thought for future discussions.